William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
It's awesome. Welcome everyone to another episode of Hard Conversations. Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance is really getting in the groove of these speaker events where we bring in these experts from around the country to really, as my guest says a lot, the more we know, the better we do. And so the more that we learn from people from around the United States and sometimes even from around the world about how we can improve our homeless response system and provide housing and services to people who are experiencing homelessness in our community, the better we all do in those endeavors. So thank you for coming. I knew that, you get into December, and in Texas, it just has to someone just has to say it might be cold, and suddenly I can't drive, I can't go anywhere. I just, I need to snuggle up and have some cocoa. So I'm glad you all made the effort to be here today. Before we begin, I also want to just make a few announcements. It's that time of year again where we start our major volunteer recruitment drive for the homeless count that we do in the end of January of next year, and we want to do it even bigger and better than we did before. And so we've now set a goal of 1,500 volunteers to count people experiencing homelessness unsheltered in Dallas and Collin County. So register your teams, take that flyer to your Sunday schools, to your neighborhood associations, to your neighborhood watch associations, to your families, and encourage you to sign up your teams. And there's a flyer on that. Another event, we do a lot of events during the day, and in a lot of our shelters they work at night, and a lot of our case managers and people live all around the Metroplex. But we know that in order to continue our message that we also want to do some of our events and educational events in the evening. And I'm really excited to bring a movie screening of Tony the Movie, and that's going to be on January 11th. And our host for that event is First United Methodist Church of Dallas. And so there's a flyer on that. And so kind of learning different experiences and different responses of homelessness from around the country is really important. And those, of course, are a free event and a time for us to share and learn the experiences and the triumphs from tragedy that people experience in homelessness, and being able to tell the story of transformed lives when they engage and encounter people like many of you here today. So I'm really excited today, and I got to see my friend Joyce Grangent. She is a Chicago native and now in the warmer climate of Atlanta. And it's important also in our community, in our continuum care strategic work plan, and one of our objectives is to very specifically and deliberately address racial disparities in housing and homeless services. And part of that is bringing in leaders, bringing in strong people from around the United States that can tell the story and have a greater impact in how we do our work. And I started to think about that. You said, I got to find Joyce. We met in 2009 when I brought her to Fort Worth to do training in that continuum of care. And I had to find her and went out on the interweb and found her and called her. And I said, I need you in Dallas. And so she has been here and providing for the last day and a half some really excellent motivational interviewing and training, because she's got what we don't have and we need. And that is the greatest wisdom of all that one gets from learned and lived experience in homelessness. And so she can tell the story from both sides and has seen in her amazing career the transformation of lives, and she has been sharing that with our frontline case managers who do some of the hardest work in our community. And so now I'm going to give her a chance to tell her story, how permanent supportive housing first, and just her own perspective and her wisdom that she's going to be sharing with us. And so let me introduce you my friend, Joyce Grangent.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am really happy to be here with you. And just by a show of hands, can I see the folks that weren't part of the last day and a half training? Oh, quite a few. Okay, that determines how much detail I go into, because I have been sharing sort of my journey over the last day and a half. So I want to start by just saying, again, my name is Joyce. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means to me is that for the last 23 plus years, I've been employed. I'm a good wife. I'm a grandma, raising 2 grandkids. I lost my daughter. Had it not been for my journey of recovery, had it not been for supportive housing years ago at my greatest point of need, I wouldn't have been able to respond when I lost my daughter in 2008 and I had to take on a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old. So I'm going to get into my journey, my pathway, but at any time, if something really pops up, I'm very flexible. I'm not wedded to every slide. Raise your hand, I'll stop. We will leave, and I guess Cindy will be my timekeeper. We'll leave some time for questions at the end. So I'm just going to share with you what my journey has been. So hopefully you'll hear from me the firsthand experience of how I not only had to come from the streets into housing, but my whole process of how I rediscovered myself. Because truly, I don't mind sharing with you, at some point I was lost. And what I tell people, because they say, well, how could you be homeless? And didn't you have a degree? And the last time I ran into you, you worked for the state. The good thing, well, one of the things you need to know is mental health does not discriminate. Substance abuse does not discriminate. And just because you're up to date doesn't mean you won't be down. So just know that it wasn't like I went to bed one night and said, you know, when I grow up, I want to be homeless. And not only do I want to be homeless, guys, I want to have a mental health diagnosis. And then to top that off, because that's not enough, I want to be a person with addiction issues. Do you know anybody that go to bed and wish for that? I didn't either. So these are our goals today. Hopefully by doing this presentation, it'll sort of open up and it gives you food for thought when you're working with individuals, or if you're just curious, like, how could a person just be hopeless, helpless, despair at their rope's end? And hopefully by hearing some of what I went through on my journey, you'll be able to at least sort of figure out for the family members or good friends maybe a little bit of what's going on. Each journey is individual, so just because my journey is this way doesn't mean the next person's journey. So how I became homeless. You know, I was saying to yesterday in the interview after the training that I had some moderate success in my life. So I had already gotten my college degree. I was working. I've had jobs with the federal government. I've worked for the state. But oftentimes people ask me sort of to rewind and think back. And I like to say, as the way I was raised is that whatever's going on with you, you act as if nothing is going on with you. We didn't share. If we ate cereal and didn't have the sugar, we just ate the plain cereal. You don't leave. My mom and dad was a big stickler. You don't leave this house and tell nothing the business that's going on in the house to others. So I think I'm sharing that to say, I think I learned how to stuff my feelings and never really react or if my feelings was hurt, I never shared that my feelings was hurt. Or whatever I was feeling, I would just put on this happy face. Think about people. You say, how you doing? Fine. I really am not doing fine all the time, but it's just in me, because I'm thinking to myself, who wants to hear that anyway? You know, nobody's really interested. So I coincidentally, I never seen myself as an addict. But guys, an addict I was. And it started off very slowly. I shared yesterday how, and this is not the whole story, but sort of what a tipping point was me. I had gotten a job in Chicago. Well, actually, it's in the suburbs. It's called Evanston. Evanston is a ritzy, predominantly Caucasian, well-to-do individuals with plenty of money. I got a job as a medical record director. My degree is in medical records, so, and it was in this suburban town in Chicago, probably a 40-minute drive from the south side of Chicago. And I think I had like 66 employees working under me. It was a 24-hour medical record department. And so one of the things that happened is very profound. Not that I didn't know discrimination exists, because from school age, you know what I shared with Cindy, you raise your hand and you know the answer, and then the teacher just skipped right over you and go to somebody else that was more pleasing to the eye, maybe, right? So, of course, I didn't name it. I didn't know what it was then. So I got this job, and the agency hired, God forbid, a black medical record director for predominantly all white. Some of the folks in the department had been there 8 years, 11 years. And so they brought me in, and there was a sense of betrayal by staff that why did they pass over the 2 or 3 great people in the department that had been there, that probably could have hit the ground running. And not only did they ignore those white folks that had been loyal to the company, but then you bring in yours truly. And every day I was on that job, I paid internally for that. The third day I was on the job, a letter was put under the administrator's door, and it says, you brought this lady in and she's trying to start a race riot. And so the administrator said, let's do lunch. I want to have lunch with you. I want to share this concern that's come to my attention. And I told her it truly couldn't have been a concern, because if it was, why didn't they put their name to it? When you throw the rock and hide, you know, so they slipped it up under her door, but she did call me in, and she wanted to know what was I doing or saying. Maybe I needed to tweak my communication skills and alleviate some of the anxiety. So she said, well, how would you like to handle it? I say, I want to finish my lunch, because I love to eat. I want to finish my lunch, and then I want to have a meeting of all of the staff in my department. And she said, well, the midnight staff won't be there. I said, well, you arrange that. That's up to you. But I want to address, because she didn't know whether somebody from midnight, was it second shift, was it first shift. So she said, well, okay, if you want to go back and address it. So I don't remember exactly what I said. That's been many years ago. But it was something to the tune that if you doing your job, you don't have to worry whether I'm purple, green, or black. Right? As long as you're doing your job, that's immaterial. And that I had an open door policy, and at any time I was open. If it meant staying late, if I needed to talk to somebody on midnight, I would stay late, do some errands. And so she was like, boy, that was just like, you blew me out the water. You just called it right out, you know? And I'm sort of that type of person that I want to address inequality wherever, but it left a scar on my soul. And I can remember after having that meeting, going into the bathroom, because I said to her when she asked me what was going on, I said, I don't even know. It was a big organization. It was on 4 different floors. You know, outpatient was one. They did outpatient. It was a huge organization. I said, I don't even know my way to the washroom yet. How can I be starting a race riot? So, she, you know, she like, I don't know either, you know. So, but the thing, I used to, now I know the term self-medicate, but after work, we would get together and we would go out, and, you know, I had a few allies in the department, couple of whites, couple of blacks. We would get together and go out after work and drink, and, you know, I never had too much because I had to drive that 40 minutes back to the south side. But what it did to me internally, it really left a scar on my soul. And I used to go to a meeting. We've all heard of self-sabotage. I would have reports that I'd have to get together about my department and present it at our staff meeting. And I know I had worked and got all of my stats from each shift. And all of us, and I had a secretary with 66 employees, had a secretary. All of a sudden, all of the hard work I had done preparing this report, I get up to get a presentation and a couple of paragraphs is missing. And I'm knowing that I did the work, right? Or I run back to the department and say, Kay, you gave me the wrong report. And she would answer my phone whenever I wasn't there. And all of a sudden, I pick up the phone and I smell alcohol and sanitizer, where I was so full of germs that my whole phone would be wiped down with alcohol. And I share this with you to say, I just kept going along to get along. I never really shared how it made me feel less than, or caused me to not be as confident. And I really was confident in my job. But it still left a scar on me. So one day, without planning, I just came to work. Well, actually, I had gotten a call at about 11 o'clock at night that the printer was not working. And that was important because the midnight shift had to pull all of the patient files and have them ready in different stations for the doctors as they seen patients that next day. So I had to get out of my bed at 11 o'clock at night, go all the way up north, and fix the printer, which I did. But then I seen my supervisor come in, and so I'm figuring I might as well just bring my clothes and stay at work, because I usually get there anytime from 7:30 to beat rush hour. And so she walked in, she was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, you know, and I looked at her And I thought to myself, because I had slept on the floor that night in my office. I slept on the floor. And I looked at her, and I don't know if any of you, I'm not suggesting that you quit a job before getting another one, but that's exactly what I did. She was so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. She like, "Oh, Joyce, how are you doing?" And I looked at her. I said, "You know, I'm really not doing good, and this is my last day today." That wasn't the wisest choice, guys, to do. But it was just like, you know what? A year and a half of this shit, I had it. So I quit the job. Back then, you could find a job the same day you quit one. Back then. I had a degree. I went to another hospital, started working, quit that job. But let me talk about how, so carrying this big ball, a knot in my stomach, I started interacting, and some of my friends was getting high. Well, I'll disclose, I always enjoyed Mary Jane. So it wasn't hard for me to then try something else, because when I was in college, we used to use cocaine to study all night. But then we would do it 1 or 2 lines, and that was the end of that, and it might be months before you even think of it. It was not my drug of choice at that time. But I started getting into happy hour and leaving work, and I was on another job, and I met, you know, new acquaintances and cutie pie, that's what I call them. And one particular cutie pie, I didn't know it at the time, but used to sell drugs, and I didn't know that at the time. But I went to a party. This is my earliest remembrance, just really overdoing it. I went to a party. It was given by somebody that worked for Chicago Transit Authority. That's the L's, that's the buses. And boy, it was just people everywhere. In one room, they were smoking weed. The next room, they was snorting cocaine. And I don't know what else they did, because I stopped right at that room. And I tell people, just so you understand, you never know what you're going to try and really like in life, right? Whereas I've been able to smoke my marijuana and do well in life and never fell out of step. You know, raised 2 kids, got my degree, worked all my life, so I had no reason to really think that my socializing was going to end up being a problem. Needless to say, without giving the drug log, it probably wasn't 3 or 4 months later that now I started looking for somebody to buy the drugs, because I couldn't wait on, well, when is the next time I'm going to get with somebody and they going to offer me a line or two? It's like, no, I want to be able to have my own little stash. And the only way I can describe it for those of you that don't, have never did your own research, is that it made me come alive. I felt so alive. I'm like, you know, this is my best friend in the world. And I know that I had an affinity to it more than my Mary Jane. So needless to say, to make this speed it up, I found my little contact person. I would buy my little package, and before you know it, it didn't take a long time, it didn't take months, it didn't take years. I was always searching, or I was always buying my little happy fix. At the time, guys, I didn't know, which I'm gonna share. I didn't know anything about addiction. I didn't know that I had a mental health disorder. I was 40-something years old. I had moderately did okay. Then I started having anxiety attacks for no reason at all. I mean, I would just hyperventilate. The first couple of times they took me to the hospital. And, you know, I couldn't breathe. And they say, well, you having anxiety attacks. Well, who the hell did I know with having anxiety attacks? What is it? How did it come? What can I do? At the time, I think the drug of choice was Valium, little 5 milligrams. I do remember it was a yellow pill. So I was having anxiety attacks. I would get dressed every morning to get ready to go to work. And I would get to the door and I would have an anxiety attack. Well, after the first couple of trips to the ER, I never went back. Guess why? They wanted to put me on the psych ward. And they said, I think you could benefit from being on, what is it called, observation 3 days or whatever. That frightened the hell out of me. So I had my little prescription of Valium, and I had my other drug of choice, and I say, I'll make it work for me. So I never went back to the hospital for the anxiety attacks, but I still got them, but I would just take a Valium, or I would get my other friend, which I was calling it at the time, my friend, and I would do okay. So it wasn't until much later I found out that I had major depression, I had a mental illness, and what I want to share about that, guys, is you get a diagnosis, what do you do with it? Like, I felt so ashamed when I was diagnosed with mental health. I tell people, it was easy for me to say, because I learned to go around the rooms and say I'm an addict. I wasn't trying to embrace no damn mental health. And so I tell people in Chicago, folks with mental health can have a whole city block by themselves. So my first thought when I got the report was like, what do I do with this? I just felt shame. Should I tell my family members? No, I didn't tell them. Should I tell my significant others? No, I didn't tell them. It was just like, you all messed up, and that wasn't the word I used in my head. So it was just, I just felt less than, and I had to, they say denial is a true state. What I did was, of course, with my degree in medical records, I wanted to read my report. And let me just back up to say, the way I happened to get diagnosed, I know some of you help people get connected to benefits, right? Do you do that? Do you help people get their SSI, SSDI? Yeah. So I had met at Claire's house, which was a shelter. They said, well, Joyce, you've been working all the time. You need to apply for your benefits and see if you're eligible. Well, at the time, they had something called general assistance. I don't know if they still have that now. That's for a single person with don't have kids, and it was $153 a month. And when I went to apply for general assistance, they can look in the computer, and I guess they seen where I worked, and they like, you need to go to Social Security Administration and apply for your disabilities. Well, that sort of started the ball rolling. You know, for those of you that don't know, if you apply for benefits, they then have to send you through all of this clinical diagnosis, neuropsychological testing. I mean, I did the whole 9 yards, and I still didn't get my benefits. what they said was you might not be able to run a medical record department, but you can do something in some other venue, was the end results. I could have kept fighting it, but I eventually got a job and I let that go. So these are the different places I went to for assistance. Mandel Legal Aid was helping me fight the rejection letter I got. Lakefront Supportive Housing is where I end up moving into. And I was told about that housing development by University of Chicago, Mandel Legal Aid. They had a clinic that helped people with their disability get approved. And they said, Joyce, I think you'd be a great candidate for supportive housing. I had never heard of the term. It wasn't my goal in life to have housing and a case manager. So, and they also said, I think you could benefit from some mental health counseling. Just go talk to somebody. It's a reason why you having these anxiety attacks, but I didn't. I didn't until I moved in to supportive housing. So, everybody in here know what supportive housing is? For the ones that's looking, is housing that's attached to support services. So it's for individuals that's either at risk of homeless or homeless. It says, now that we get Joyce in housing, we want to look at all of the reasons that had her on the street in the first place. Is it mental health? Is it diagnosed or undiagnosed substance abuse disorder? Is it some physical ailment? I could be in end-stage renal failure, whatever. But it really gets that person in housing, and then it attaches all of the supportive services around them. In my case, it was the mental health, which I wasn't naming at that time. Really didn't believe I had any mental health, but I could agree that substances was a problem. And the way I knew it was a problem, I lost my housing. You know, I started making choices that didn't make sense. But from an addict point of view, it did make sense. You know, as long as I was waiting on my paycheck, I was going to do great things. And I had no reason to think I wasn't. I had always had housing. But when I got the paycheck, it was just have one more. Just have one more. And that got to be a situation going nowhere fast. Finally, the day came when I was going to be evicted. And I moved out prior to being evicted. I think I had 3 days before the folks was coming to put my stuff out. I had been served. I had the letter in my hand. So what I did was got my brother and a couple of friends, and we took most stuff to shelter. But then the other 3 days I stayed in the apartment. I left some things that I just sold for little or nothing, and I had a big party, much like one of the case studies we talked about today in our group. I just invited folks over, and boy, we had us a good time, you know. But I knew I was leaving. And I say that I didn't really know I was homeless, because I had my first child at 18. I lived with my mom. She helped out a lot, but she wasn't for that you going out lollygagging on the weekend. You gonna leave the child with me while you go out in the evening. Once I finished school or work, that was my responsibility, and she ensured that I stood up to it. So I'm saying that to say, I felt liberated. It's like, okay, I don't have to pay $9.75 rent. My whole check is free. I might have, and I think storage at that time might have been something like $90 a month. It got so bad, guys, I lost everything. I didn't pay the $90 a month. So finally, that's how I got homeless. And I say to folks, at first it was like fun. my daughter, my son was already grown and out the house. This all happened to me in middle life. I was 47, 46, 47. And my daughter was like 16 or 17. But I had a sister that was serving in the Air Force, and she became really, really ill. And my daughter went there to help her out with her 2 kids. She had a 5-year-old and a 6-month-old. And so my daughter went there to go to school, and boy, did I, it's like free at last, free at last. I'm free. And I share that to say, without me having to keep the front up for my daughter, it was like I was here, there, and everywhere. Even when I stayed in the park, it was like, oh boy, is this fun. Look, you can see the sun come up. You laying on the beach. I didn't really know what homeless was because it hadn't got to be a problem. And some of you know when it's a problem, right? When you go to somebody's house and they wake up at 7 in the morning slamming doors and pantries, you know what that's a signal for, right? Time to get the hell out of here. So I had went from boyfriend to girlfriends to, and finally I did. I was, on the street for several nights. And I tried to say to myself it was fun, but not so much. So finally I came to the realization that I needed help. I think I was over my significant other at the time house, and I heard this commercial. And I don't know if any of you old enough, but they used to have a commercial that went something like, if your life is spinning out of control, it's like putting a gun to your head. It was about cocaine addiction. Now, I had heard that commercial over and over again. For some reason, it resonated with me that time. And what I did was I finished getting high. I didn't jump up right away. I finished my little package that I had. And I called the number, and they told me, come right in. And I drove. At that time, I still had a car. My car ended up getting repossessed. At that time, I had the car. I went over, and they started talking to me about AA, because it wasn't treatment. It was just like somebody was there. I even forget the name of the organization. That's long gone. But it was like a sponsor, somebody to sort of talk to you about what your options was, how you could do self-help. And she took me to an AA meeting, and I'm like, well, I just finished using drugs. I'm trying to back out now. I'm already thinking about my next one. And she like, come on, we're going to go to a meeting. What kind of meeting? She said, you going to meet people that's just like you. And I can remember going to that meeting, guys, and it was like I had come home. The reason I say that, to hear people stand up and talk about what their life journey was like, was my first glimmer of hope. To hear people, they was looking good, they still had their jewelry. I had pawned all of mine. And I'm looking at these people, and they talk about when they used to sleep in abandoned buildings, and you would never know it. I mean, they were just everyday people sharing from their heart. And from that, have you heard of addictive personality? I got addicted to going to the meetings. Because for there, I really felt like maybe there's some hope for you. Maybe there's a reason why you're not crazy, And so that was my first entree into recovery. I wasn't all the way sold that I was an addict, and I didn't know any of the terminology. But because I was able to get into supportive housing, where they wrapped those support services around me, I was assigned a peer. A peer then in the 90s was someone that had the addiction issues like I did. That person was also a mental health consumer. They took me around the neighborhood, showed me where the churches were, where I could get clean clothes, and that sort of thing. And I confided in the peer before I confided in my case manager. Even though my case manager was a real nice, engaging person, I didn't really trust her. So I would pick and choose what I was going to discuss with her. So then I began to establish the relationship with my case manager, and she was a very engaging. So I shared yesterday in the training, when folks treat you really nice, we all got home training, right? So it was like, oh boy, she kept saying, Joyce, you'd be great on the tenant newsletter. Why don't you work on the hospitality committee? Or, you know, would you like to be part of our property management and tenant council? And I wasn't having none of it. I'm thinking to myself, I didn't move in here for this shit. I got real life problems. I ain't interested in the tenant newsletter. So, but I did keep the appointments they made for me. That was the one thing I said. If you're going to get your life back on track, you're going to have to be open to suggestions and recommendations. So I actually started working with the mental health practitioner, and it was a game, just so you know. I wasn't all the way wedded, but I said, I want my disability, so I know they need to put something in the damn record, so I'm going to go along with them. And I really don't know at what point it got serious for me, but it did get serious for me. And I'm like, you know what? My mother didn't raise no fools, so now that you got the opportunity to look at all of these issues, that's, you know, like they told me, the anxiety was just a symptom that something was wrong. So I said, you need to, you know, now that you got all these people working on your behalf, you need to take it seriously. Also, my peer helped me with that process. They were giving me medication for major depression, anxiety disorder. It's another big one. But anyway, to make a long story short, I was on several drugs, and they would say, well, how do you feel? And I would say, well, how am I supposed to feel if you telling me I've been messed up my whole life? I don't even know how to express what I should feel like. And then they started working with me. Well, does it make you anxious? Are you able to sleep? What's your quality of sleep? But anyway, they finally came up with a cocktail that I was taking. Now, at first, I was flushing it down the toilet. I wasn't going to take it because I seen other people in supportive housing that looked like walking zombies. And I was like, ooh, I ain't taking that medication. But then my neighbor shared something with me, and it's funny how I never recognized that. She said, Joyce, I hear you at night, and you just be walking around, and, you know, she said, you should take the medicine. She said, you will be able to sleep so much better. That was my first insight that I should try this medication that I had been flushing down the toilet, because all I really wanted was to make a good case to get my disability. And she said, I said, well, they say I got major depression and I got hyperactivity disorder. Can't you tell, guys? And she said, yeah, so do I. She said, and I take my medication, and I looked at her, wasn't no slob in her mouth. You know how some people take that medicine and you see slob in their mouth? And she was walking right, and she was cute. And I'm telling you, it was profound to me that she was on medication. So that's how I started. Wasn't nothing the psychiatrist said, wasn't nothing the mental health therapist said that was going to make me take that medicine. But when I looked at her and she looked like she was doing okay, I started taking my medication. And yes, guys, I slept good. So, eventually I got well enough, or I was doing well enough. I call it time to make the donuts. Now I need to start thinking about what am I going to do with my life. At that time, I probably had been unemployed for close to a year, maybe 14 months, somewhere in there. So I did start volunteering on the newsletter. I did start volunteering, and we got paid for voter registration. Once you went through the training and you worked, you got paid. So that was extra money for me. They asked me would I go and be part of the CAPS initiative. CAPS stand for Chicago Alternative Police something. But anyway, that's where you find out how many robberies been in the neighborhood, what intervention, what the street cop, and and then I would have a place on the agenda, guys. When we had our property management and tenant service meeting, I would get up and have 10 minutes on the agenda to talk about what was going on in our community. I'm saying that to say I started developing leadership skills. Then I went through leadership training. The building offered, I think they selected 16 people to go through, well, you had to write a letter why you think you'd be a good leader, and the staff selected who they wanted, but you had to show interest. And I went through the leadership training. One reason I went through it is because I was tired of turning down everything they offered. And the other reason, I'm like, well, they offer dinners every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. And I smelled the food. It sure smelled good. And so I really gravitated. So we learned skills like advocacy and how to tell your story in a succinct manner without given a drug-a-log. Everybody know what a drug-a-log is? I used to do this, and now I do that, and you'll get so caught up in the drug-a-log, they call it glorifying your addiction. Anybody ever heard that before? Well, when you go through leadership training, they teach you how to tell your story to legislators. They don't have much time, but to say how it worked, why it didn't work, and what it is you accomplishing now. So I went through that 12 or 16-week leadership training. I was selected to go to Philadelphia to get more organizing training. We worked on a project called the Jeremiah Housing, where I really got to learn what it is to organize. Like our past president, Barack Obama, was the organizer. So the next thing I wanted to do was go back to work, because I just wasn't having enough money, and I really, really needed more money. And I really wanted to, do some of the things I was used to doing. Go out of town, go on a vacation. So I was told that by my psychiatrist, by my mental health therapist, and also my recovery sponsor was like, which is where we get this, everybody's in recovery when they broke. It's the decisions you make when you got money in your pocket that'll sort of determine. So I was told that, Joyce, you know about the world of work. You've been working your whole life. You need to focus on you and the issues that brought you here. And, so I was like anxious. I wanted to go back to work, but then I felt like maybe I shouldn't because nobody expects anything. And what if I go back to work and I fail? Or what if I go back to work and the first time I get $600 or $800, I'm off and running again? So I was very anxiety ridden about this whole going back to work. 1 week I was confident, the next week I wasn't so sure. So these bullet points just talk about some of the considerations. They said, well, why don't you try working in supportive housing? Because they had what's called desk clerks. Anybody heard desk clerks? They work the front desk. They sign people in and out. Now that's different from scattered site housing. Of course, there wouldn't be any desk clerks. But they say it's other jobs you can do that they understand what you're going through, meaning the addiction and the mental health, and it'll be easy to get those jobs. So they talked about using in-house jobs. Hence, after I had been there maybe 18 months, close to 2 years, I did take an in-house job at the supportive housing agency. But believe me, what's needed is support, support, support. The case managers didn't take too kindly to, because I said, I'm not doing the desk clerk. I knew that would be too stressful for me, you know, getting cussed out and, you know, trying to get in the building, and, you know, I just didn't want that. So they said, well, I had served for a year as a tenant representative on the board of directors. And this was truly a board. It was very intentional. I had to fill out an application, say why I wanted to serve on the board, how it would help represent the other tenants. Make a long story short, I was selected to serve, not only me, but another young man was selected to serve on the board of directors. I had a job description before every meeting. They took time to say, okay, this is what's happening today. Here's the action points. Here's next steps. This is where you get feedback. Because it was my job and his to go to all of the 6 buildings and get information and take it back to the board. So one of the things that I remember taking back was the tenants really wanted a true employment program. And so that's what we advocated for. It took 2 years for them to write the grants or get the money, but we did. They hired, then it was like 600-700 tenants. They hired 2 job developers, 1 job coach, yours truly, and there was somebody else, job developer, job coach, and director of employment. So, as I work with people, it's on marketing. You know, it was like I had to go in and be interviewed, dress for success. So, just really being able to talk to the recruiter. It's a true HR department. Joyce, why do you think you're the best person for the job? You know, I had to be able to talk about why I thought that I would be a good person to be a job coach. Now, there's no school for job coaching, at least none that I know of. So, you know, after they explained what that entailed, just working with my peers on resume development, interviewing skills, you know, how to do mock interview. How do you talk about 4 or 5 years out of the workforce and not be like a deer caught in headlights? And I was responsible as the job coach for running what they called then the job club. The job club was more or less what they called dress for success, soft skill development. It was twice a week, 90 minutes each session. So, I got hired in supportive housing, kept going to therapy, kept taking my medication. And guys, I started doing okay. I started to really see where my life was coming back together again. I was earning a paycheck. I was very fearful. I can remember I made $8 and something an hour. I had made much more money than that prior to my downfall. But to see that first check, which I don't know, might have been $900, $1,200, it was like my knees started shaking. Yeah, because then I'm worried, like, okay, all of the staff going home at night, and, you know, what am I going to do? And, you know, I really was fearful that I wasn't going to make the right decisions. I signed up for, what is it called? Direct deposit. So the check went to the bank through the credit union, signed up. Credit union did a lot of training with us. They used to come out to the building, train clients on money management, how to open up a savings account, checking account, that sort of thing. So my first check went to direct deposit. So remembering my inner voice. And this is what, in my job, as I had to always work with the other tenants to say, you're not going to an AA meeting. So going to employment, and yesterday people laughed and showed by hand. If we don't work with our folks to let them know that while the different agencies they work with understand their plight, you can't go to the employer and start talking about you got to take your medication at 12:30 and 3 and, you know, and, you know, I'm going to miss my morning AA meeting. Now the employer don't want to hear that, right? But if we don't work with them to tell them that, they will go. And I know that because I worked in employment all of the 8 years I worked in. They'll go right there and start talking about what medication they on, and why they run into the bathroom so much. And, you know, so we make sure you work with folks so that they know, depending on what venue, information is on a need-to-know basis. So these are just some things to consider when you're working with people. Nobody really will present and tell you I'm fearful, I'm feeling my self-esteem is this low, but knowing that you might need to work with them on appearance, attitude, that can really stagnate a person. And I know for me, I didn't really know who to listen to, who was the right voice. When I thought I was ready for work, and my psychologist and psychiatrist, because the psychiatrist, you know, dispensed the medication, write the prescription, was saying, no, I think you need to, you know, work with us a little longer. So just know that sometimes we might think folks don't want to work, but we got to make sure what voices are they listening. Maybe they practitioners telling them, because I know for a long time, I was told that I did not need to work. I always tried to, and this came through therapy, not to be the victim, but also to be affirmative and use I statements. So have you ever sort of felt like, or maybe an incident happened in your life when you said, well, I feel like you diss me when you said X. And the person will say, whether it's your supervisor, which is most times I hear this, oh, you being too thin-skinned. That's not really what I meant. You too sensitive. You're going to have to toughen up. But really, no one has the right to tell you. If you tell them you use I statements, I feel as if, now what they can say, oh, Joyce, I'm sorry you felt that way. That's not what I meant when I said it. I really meant X, because just because I think it don't make it so. And that's what I mean. Don't be a victim. You're not powerless. You know, so I don't believe in playing the victim role. However, I would not tell my client, oh, that didn't really happen to you. That's not what they meant when they said that, because that's to discount their experience. Does that make sense? I said, don't be a rebel, angry at the world. And you know, me being a black female, how many people heard of the angry black woman? Right. So I had to be very careful that I wasn't wearing that hat. But guys, I really was angry for a long time. I just felt like the world was treating me unfairly. I had always worked. I worked in the daytime, went to school at night, got a degree. Why me? Why did this happen to me? So I was angry, and then they told me I could get disability. But then it was all of those hoops, seeing the psychiatrist, working with therapists, taking all these tests, and you know, I was angry, but I learned to manage that anger in an appropriate way and to talk about it. I really did a lot of talking, going to AA, working with my therapist. I'm telling you, I laid on the couch for a long time. I think I was in therapy for well over 3 years. Even when I moved out of housing, I was still seeing my therapist. I just wasn't going as intensely as I used to. So it takes time. And I guess the point I'm making is this a process. People don't get all messed up and take that rounding road overnight. And generally, they don't turn around overnight. Okay, so here I am, 20 years later, homeowner. I should have updated this bullet point because I'm not married anymore. All in self-disclosure, but it was on my terms. So it's just like, you know, this not working. I felt like I was doing a little bit too much caretaking, raising the grandkids, husband, you know, it's just like, look, when is my time in the sun? And so I'm self-employed, I'm a national speaker, and I have a renewed sense of self-esteem. And the thing I like most, guys, about what I do is that I can help others like myself. I never forget where I came from, never. Because to forget where I came from, I can easily go back. So that's a little bit about my story. We're going to end this, and I want to, for 5 minutes, this film is probably 7, 8 minutes, and then we're going to take questions. So while they're getting it started, any questions thus far? Comment. This video, yes?
I was going to ask, how long did you stay in supportive housing?
3.5 years.
What made you decide to move on from that?
I wanted a home, and you're going to see it on this video. I'm going to take your question after this, please. I have a great life. I have a wonderful marriage. I have a beautiful grandson. And I have a really, really great job that I really enjoy doing. What services you'll provide to them? What services will be on site? Exactly. I went through quite a rough period with using substances, drinking. I lost 2 or 3 jobs in a couple of years. And I sort of felt like I was nobody. I went and filled out the application, went for the interview. I was accepted to the Delmar Apartments, which was one of the greatest moments of my life. It made me feel safe and it gave me security. One of the things that I knew for sure, that if I was going to get my life back, I was going to have to work very hard. It was very intimidating in that on the board was lawyers, high-powered people, developers, and here I was, a recovering person. bringing information to the board. Serving on the board of directors at Lakefront really opened up the door to a lot of very interesting things in my life. I started to give testimony at City Hall about jobs and economic development, affordable housing. I think the thing that I really liked about that position was that I could work with my peers, which were other tenants. I could use my past skills to help them. I got offered a new position with quite a bit more money and a wide variety of opportunities. I often get to travel and give speeches, appear on TV. I definitely don't get bored. One of the things that I had always wanted was to buy a home. And so while I was at Lakefront, I began to pay off my debts and I bought a home. I think it's a very beautiful home. It's 3-bedroom, full basement, 2-car garage, and I love it. When I went to sign the papers at closing and they handed over the keys, I was ecstatic. It really felt like I had made a tremendous accomplishment in my life. We are very fortunate. When you have a place to live, that is a blessing. I know that I had to be willing, so I want to give myself some credit, but Lakefront definitely laid the foundation upon which I built.
manager had that influenced your concerns with her?
I think deep, true, caring, and setting the bar high for me by saying, you'd be great on the newsletter. You'd be great on the hospitality committee. They always believed in me. And I tell people, my self-esteem was this big when I moved into housing, but they believed in me so much till I borrowed on their optimism until I developed my own. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, finally it was like being put under. You know, they believed it, so I just kept coming. Right? So I would say the fact that, and this is real important, guys, I never left an interaction with that case manager where I felt my dignity and respect was in jeopardy, or that they had dissed me during that interview. Even when they didn't agree with me, and I acted ugly sometimes, they still treated me. Yes, Miss Grangent. No, Miss Grangent. Is it okay if I call you Joyce? Yes.
You may have addressed this just a little bit, but to what degree, I mean, there's a certain amount of, like you said, you own it, you see where people are leading you, they have confidence in me, I'm just going to own that and keep moving.
Right.
But what I find is that, you know, the experience that comes, you talk about being scarred by your employer's decisions to make what appear to be unequitable decisions in hiring.
Right.
Whether or not they work.
Right.
But I think homelessness itself leaves a scar on people. You feel rejected by society. It's not that you don't have culpability yourself with addiction or responsibility or finding your way, but you feel very rejected by your community. And being able to transition back, there's sometimes people helping, and like you said, I think you addressed this with your case manager, if you're not careful, you know, you don't want to be like condescending or we're going to make you,
Right.
we're going to put you in a hat and make you Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, and it be a little, that transition from being a wounded, I mean, it's a wounded, homelessness is a wounded place. Be welcomed back to society, where you can function and contribute among those who've never been there and still assist those who are coming out of that. So can you address, like, where or what helped you, and maybe it was just a slow incremental process to recover from the wound of homelessness, the sense of abandonment by society, to the degree that you experienced that?
You know, I guess I did feel that was that anger.
Yeah.
I talked about it. But it's like a wound that's being massaged and people putting salve on it and putting a Band-Aid. I met some truly guys, which is why I'm doing this work. My degree is in medical record administration. I could get jobs, but that made such an impression on me, I've never looked back. I've been doing this work ever since. So it was because of the caring practitioners, the therapists, that everybody did have a willingness to not only help, but more importantly, to listen and try to understand where I was coming from.
And treat you with dignity and respect.
And they treated me with dignity and respect. That means a lot.
It means a lot.
It means a lot. Any other question, comment? Yes?
So you were talking about, this is all about housing first too, so is there a time in your supported housing experience that you really felt like you kind of had to draw upon that housing first philosophy in order to be able to stay in the housing, like where maybe your actions or your behavior would have been interpreted differently in a treatment first or a non-housing first type program, or maybe you would have had your housing threat. I'm just trying to see how housing first specifically, was helpful in your
Well, let me just share with you, back when I moved into housing, which was in 94, they wasn't talking too much about housing first, okay? But some of the strategies that the case manager used is definitely straight from housing first. What we know housing first to be. Treating people with dignity and respect. Being respectful when, if I said I want a job, they engage me around the meeting on time. All of that was in the leadership development. And I did. I left with way more skills than I came in with. And I had a degree. But nobody had ever, I guess being in management is a leadership. I mean, it was just different. They started from A and went all the way to Z. And I really appreciate the training I got when I was in supportive housing. Any other question, comment? Yeah?
Is it possible for someone in their 70s to be able to advance to a higher level?
And where? In housing or just in life? Because I'm 68. So if you in your 70s, I'm sneaking up on you really quick. Yeah, I'll be 69 in February. And yes, I would say yes. You set the bar for how far you want to go, right? What's your goal?
I still have, even at my age, I still have goals and ambitions. One of the things I think I would like to do is become a UN.
A UN interpreter? I think that's a great goal, and I think that, look, I would think we would need that, right? So, yeah, do you work with, are you taking classes? I know you say you're teaching yourself, but it might have a little bit, be seen in a better light if you connected, say, if you was doing online, so that a community college or a university, you know what I'm saying? Because sometimes they look for that credential, right? Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, I would say go for it. I don't think age has anything to do with your ambitions and goals. Okay. Okay. Great, great. Yeah.
So, like, you mentioned, like, going from job to job to job. How did you, like, within yourself manage to, I guess, tell yourself, like, how do you cope with going from job to job to job?
It was just, it is what it is. I just was so hopeless till I knew I was going to get fired, so I would just stop going. So every job I lost, I exited myself. Yeah, that was my strategy. I'm like, all good, you got left up now, so you might not show up there. You ain't been there in 4 days. They call it no call, no show. So I worked with other folks as a manager and write them up. So I knew it wasn't long before I was going to get my walking paper. Yeah, yes.
So I know you were engaged with, like, a lot of the services, obviously it's mental health and all of that, but for all the committees and things that you became a part of, would you say it was an internal motivator that made you, like, engage and become a part of that? Or was there something that the agency did to incentivize that? Or how did you?
Everything they did, they incentivized. Like I said, we got dinners if we go to the committee. We would get little stuff like, if you come and participate on the property management committee, I don't even know if they had dollar stores at that time, but my point is it was cheap. Little, you know, they would give you kitchen cleanser for your unit. Well, that's $1 and something you didn't have to spend. So there was always some form of reward for participation. But I do want to, as I said, give myself some credit. I think that I knew that if I was going to get my life back on track, I was going to have to work at it. So I was open and receptive to some things, and some things I weren't. So I would say some of it is intrinsic, because I wanted to, you know, not always be in one room. But I did take that time out while I was there to really work on Joyce. And it was a long process. Yeah. One more question? All righty. Anybody else have a burning desire? Yeah. With me? Trying to make myself feel better. because of just life. Life was kicking me in my rear end. And I just was, of course, when I first did it, I didn't know that I was going to have such an affinity to it. That's why I said, when you try things, you never know what you're going to try and like. I thought it was going to be like marijuana. You can smoke that, put it down, and go on about your business and be successful. So I thought it was going to be the same with the substance abuse. It totally was different. Probably just the undiagnosed mental health that was there. I just didn't know it. The anxiety attacks was the first sign and symptom that something was going on. So I would say the major depression, which was a true diagnosis, I say that pushed me into it. And I was just trying to self-medicate, make myself feel better. All right. Guys, you have been very attentive. I hope you got something out of that.
Thank you very much. And I want to let you know that, we budgeted a little bit, hire her as a consultant, and I budgeted, figured about 40 people would come, and we had over 100 people take her training, and so that meant we had a profit, but we're a nonprofit, so I'm going to take those proceeds, we're going to put it back in, and bring Joyce back because she also has an amazing skill where she shadows case managers as they do their work, engaging with folks who are experiencing homelessness or people in post-mortem housing. So we're going to be bringing her back to Dallas and working with several of our agencies. So this is not the last we've seen of her. Thank you.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.